The people who were thin in the 1970s were not thinner because they worked harder at it. They were thinner because the food system they lived inside made weight gain genuinely difficult. The system that replaced it made weight gain nearly unavoidable. Understanding what Americans actually ate in that decade explains almost everything about what happened after. If you remember eating in the 1970s, subscribe to American Throwback. And if something in this video takes you back, tell us in the comments, because the women who remember this firsthand are the ones who understand it best. Let us walk through what America actually ate in the 1970s and why it produced such different results than what followed. Breakfast. The typical American breakfast in 1970 was not elaborate. Black coffee, a piece of toast, maybe a glass of orange juice. For most working adults, breakfast was consumed quickly at the kitchen table before leaving the house, or skipped almost entirely without much consequence. Eggs and bacon appeared on weekday mornings in some households, but they were not the daily expectation they had been for an earlier generation. Breakfast was fuel, consumed briefly, and then the day began. Children ate cereal, but the cereal of 1970 was a different product than what those same brand names would become. The sugar content was lower across the board. Lucky Charms existed, but it was not the concentrated sugar delivery system it later became. Frosted Flakes were sweet but noticeably less sweet than the modern version. Cereal was a breakfast food. It had not yet fully crossed into the territory of breakfast-shaped dessert. Orange juice came from the freezer as a small cylinder of frozen concentrate. One can was mixed with 3 cans of water. The standard serving was 4 ounces, a small glass, not a tall glass. The juice was meant as a morning supplement, not as an all-day beverage. Coffee was black or with a small amount of cream and sugar added at home. The coffee culture that would eventually produce beverages containing 400 or 500 calories did not exist in any form. Coffee was a stimulant taken in modest quantities, not a sweet, creamy, calorie-dense meal in a cup. Breakfast outside the home was genuinely rare during the week. Diners existed, pancake houses existed, but they were destinations for weekend family outings, not daily routines. The enormous breakfast platters that would later become standard, the kind that constitute a full day's worth of calories on a single plate, had not yet normalized. A woman named Margaret in suburban Columbus, Ohio, ate the same breakfast almost every morning throughout the 1970s. Coffee with 1 spoon of sugar, 2 slices of toast with butter. A small glass of orange juice mixed from the can in the freezer. She was not on a diet. She was not counting anything. That was simply breakfast, what it looked like, what it cost, and what it took. Lunch. The standard American lunch in the 1970s was a sandwich. 2 slices of bread, a few slices of deli meat, or a thin spread of peanut butter. Maybe a piece of cheese, a small bag of chips if the household kept them. A piece of fruit from the bowl on the counter, water or milk to drink. It fit in a paper bag because the amount of food was appropriate to what a paper bag can hold. School lunches were institutional and not particularly exciting, but they were calibrated to what a child actually needed to get through an afternoon. A main course, a vegetable, a piece of fruit, and a carton of milk. The portions were designed for children, which meant they were sized for children. School lunch was nutrition delivery, not entertainment. Fast food existed as a lunchtime option, but it occupied a different cultural position than it would later. Going to McDonald's for lunch was an occasional thing, a Friday treat, a day when the usual routine had broken down. The portions at that McDonald's were dramatically smaller than what the same name would eventually sell. A hamburger was the size of a hamburger. A large order of fries was smaller than what today's menu calls a small. A complete meal came in under 600 calories. The restaurant was not designed for lingering. The seating was not comfortable. You ordered, you ate, you left. The entire experience discouraged the extended, repeated, habitual visits that would later become part of the fast food business model. Dinner. The structure of the American dinner in the 1970s was largely consistent across households of different income levels and regions. Meat, a starch, a vegetable, one serving of each. The protein portion was a normal-sized piece of meat, a chicken breast that reflected the actual size of a chicken breast rather than a bird bred to produce outsized portions. A steak was 6 to 8 ounces, not the 16-ounce slabs that would later appear on restaurant menus as standard offerings. The protein anchored the plate, but it did not dominate it. Vegetables were not optional. They were not negotiable. Children ate them because dinner included vegetables, and that was understood by everyone at the table without requiring explanation or reward. The vegetables were not disguised under cheese sauces or prepared to be unrecognizable. They were prepared simply and eaten as a matter of course. Potatoes were potatoes, real ones, peeled and boiled or baked. Not processed potato products engineered for maximum palatability. The starch was recognizable as what it was. Bread came with dinner in many households, a roll or a slice, but it was not unlimited. No basket was constantly replenished. No server appeared to ask if the bread basket needed refilling. One piece of bread accompanied the meal. That was the portion. Home cooking meant actually cooking. Meat started raw. Vegetables were fresh or frozen. The meal was assembled from recognizable ingredients by someone who knew what they were doing, and that process produced a different result than the restaurant meals and processed foods that would later take over a significant portion of American eating. Seconds were not automatic. The meal was sufficient. When it was finished, eating was over. Margaret made dinner from scratch almost every night, a pork chop or a chicken thigh, green beans from the garden or from a plain frozen bag, mashed potatoes made from actual potatoes. It took about 45 minutes, and it was enough. Nobody left the table hungry, and nobody left the table overfull. That specific balance, sufficient without excess, was the ordinary experience of an American family dinner in the 1970s. Snacking. Eating between meals was actively discouraged throughout the 1970s. The concern was that snacking would reduce appetite for the next meal, and that was considered a problem rather than an acceptable trade-off. Children who asked for food between meals were told to wait. The 3-meal structure was treated as a framework worth maintaining, and it was maintained through a combination of household enforcement and social expectation. This is not a small thing. The number of times a person eats in a day has a direct relationship with total caloric intake. 3 meals a day with minimal eating between them represents a fundamentally different pattern than the continuous eating that would later become normalized. Snack foods existed, but their role in daily life was constrained. A small bag of chips was a treat, not a default. A cookie was a cookie, 1 or 2 of them eaten occasionally, not a package consumed in front of a television. Fruit was the most common between meal food available in most households, both because it was inexpensive and because it required no preparation. Vending machines in workplaces and schools offered a limited selection in limited portion sizes. A candy bar was smaller than modern versions. A soda came in 12 ounces. The machine was not a meal replacement. It was an occasional convenience. After-school snacks for children were modest and specific: a glass of milk and a few cookies, a piece of fruit, a peanut butter sandwich if the afternoon had been particularly long. The snack was designed to bridge the gap to dinner, not to replace it. Late-night eating was rare because the conditions that enabled it did not yet exist. Kitchens were cleaned and closed after dinner. Refrigerators did not contain a ready supply of convenient grab-and-go processed foods. Eating after dinner required real effort and genuine hunger to justify. And genuine hunger was not typically present because dinner had been sufficient. Beverages. Water in the 1970s came from the tap, from drinking fountains, from garden hoses, from wherever water was available. It was free and it was everywhere. The bottled water industry did not exist as a consumer product category. The idea of paying money for water packaged in a plastic bottle would have struck most Americans of that decade as genuinely strange. Hydration was simple, free, and required no purchasing decision. Soda occupied a completely different position in the American diet than it would come to occupy. The standard bottle was 6.5 ounces. The 12-ounce can was considered a generous size. A 32-ounce cup of soda from a convenience store did not exist. The 64-ounce option that would later become available was incomprehensible from the perspective of 1970s portion expectations. Soda was a treat beverage. It was served at birthday parties, brought out for special occasions, purchased occasionally as a small pleasure. It was not a daily default. It was not what you reached for when you were thirsty. It was not consumed continuously throughout the day. Milk was served with meals for children in 8-ounce glasses, a cup. Not 16 ounces, not a large glass. A cup of milk alongside the plate of food, consumed during the meal and then done. Orange juice belonged to breakfast and stayed there. 4 ounces in the morning was the conventional serving, and that was the end of it for the day. Juice was not carried throughout the day in a large cup. It was not consumed as a substitute for water or as a continuous beverage. It was a breakfast item, served in breakfast quantities. Here is what the beverage section of a 1970s life actually looked like. Water throughout the day, from wherever it was available. Coffee in the morning, once or twice, black or nearly so. 4 ounces of orange juice at breakfast. 8 ounces of milk at dinner for the children. A soda on Friday evening, 12 ounces, shared enjoyment. The caloric contribution from beverages in that pattern is minimal. The caloric contribution from the beverages that replaced that pattern is one of the most significant and least visible sources of excess calories in the modern American diet. Dessert. Dessert in the 1970s was special because it was not constant. Sunday dinner ended with dessert. Birthday celebrations included cake. Holiday meals had their traditional sweets. The occasions that called for dessert were defined and bounded, and that meant dessert retained the quality of being something worth anticipating. Apple pie, chocolate cake, a bowl of ice cream. These things appeared at the right moments and were enjoyed with genuine pleasure precisely because they were not available all the time. Ice cream came in pint containers and in half-gallon containers, portioned into small scoops for individual servings. The premium high-fat ice cream products that would later occupy significant freezer space were not yet available. Ice cream was a treat, served in treat-sized portions. Cookies were frequently homemade and served in small numbers for specific occasions. A plate of cookies at the holidays. A few cookies after school on a special day. The labor involved in making them from scratch meant they were not continuously available, and continuous availability was not the expectation. Candy was purchased by the piece at penny candy counters. Candy bars were meaningfully smaller than modern versions of the same products. Halloween candy was a once-a-year abundance. The idea of keeping candy permanently stocked and accessible throughout the year as a default pantry item was not the general practice. Birthday cake was for birthdays, not for office celebrations that happened weekly, not for random Tuesday afternoons. The specific occasion gave the cake its meaning, and the rarity of the occasion gave the dessert its pleasure. Fast food. In the 1970s, McDonald's was a treat, not a daily destination, not a default option when the alternative required effort, not a meal that appeared in the routine several times a week. It was a treat, a departure from the ordinary, consumed with some level of recognition that this was different from what usually happened. Portions were dramatically smaller. A hamburger was a small disc of beef on a small bun. French fries came in one standard size that today would not qualify as a small. A small Coca-Cola was 10 ounces. An entire meal, hamburger, fries, and a small drink came in around 600 calories and was understood to be a complete and sufficient lunch for an adult. The restaurant was not designed for extended occupation. The seating was hard and the lighting was bright. The experience was calibrated for speed, fast service, fast eating, fast departure. The business model depended on turnover, not on customers staying for an hour with a large beverage that required refilling. Kentucky Fried Chicken was a Sunday dinner alternative for families who wanted a hot meal without cooking. A bucket of chicken meant actual chicken pieces in quantities appropriate to the family's size. The sides were reasonable portions. It was a convenient family meal, consumed at home around the family table, not an individual feast purchased and eaten alone. Pizza was Saturday night family food. One pizza, shared by 4 people, eaten in the living room or at the kitchen table. Slices were pizza-sized. The amount eaten was what a reasonable person eats when sharing a pizza with 3 other people. The fast food industry existed, but it had not yet become the infrastructure of daily American eating. The chains were present, but not everywhere. They were options, not defaults. Grocery shopping. The grocery store of the 1970s was physically smaller than its modern equivalent. That difference in size reflected a genuine difference in what was available to purchase. The store perimeter, the fresh produce section, the meat counter, and the dairy case contained most of what families needed and most of what families bought. Interior aisles existed, but they held a more limited selection of canned goods, dry staples, and basic packaged foods. The sheer volume and variety of processed food products that would later fill those aisles had not yet been produced. Shopping was planned. Grocery lists were written at home before the trip, consulted throughout the store, and followed. Impulse purchases happened, but store layout and the tighter household budgets of the era meant that shopping was purposeful rather than exploratory. Convenience stores were genuinely convenient. Small stores meant for emergency purchases when the grocery trip had not produced everything needed. They were not food destinations with elaborate hot food sections and enormous soda fountains. The convenience was structural, not culinary. Bulk purchasing of processed foods was limited by storage. Households did not have oversized chest freezers or large pantry spaces that would later enable stockpiling of processed foods with long shelf lives. Limited storage space meant more frequent shopping for fresher ingredients and less accumulation of the kind of perpetually available processed food that contributes to continuous eating. What made the difference? High fructose corn syrup did not yet exist in the American food supply in 1970. Sugar was expensive. It was used in foods that required sweetness, but it was used in quantities constrained by its cost. The low-cost industrial sweetener that would eventually saturate virtually every processed food category, pushing sweetness into products that had never contained it and amplifying sweetness in those that had, was not yet in the American food supply. The introduction of high fructose corn syrup to soft drinks in the late 1970s was not a small event. By 1980, Coca-Cola had begun replacing sugar with the cheaper sweetener. The cost reduction allowed serving sizes to increase while maintaining or even reducing price. The cycle that followed, bigger portions at the same or lower cost, drove portion inflation across the entire industry. Food processing in 1970 was less sophisticated in a specific and important way. The combination of sugar, salt, and fat that research would later identify as producing maximum palatability, the formula that makes certain foods very difficult to stop eating, had not yet been precisely engineered into the food supply. Food was food. It was not yet a product specifically calibrated to override the body's natural satiety signals. The research that identified these mechanisms and the application of that research by food manufacturers came later. And when it came, it changed everything about how processed food was formulated. Eating occasions were bounded. 3 meals a day with clear boundaries around when eating was appropriate represented the norm, and that norm was actively reinforced by households, schools, workplaces, and the culture at large. The continuous eating that came to be described as grazing, the pattern of consuming something every hour or two throughout the day, had not yet been positioned as a healthy or desirable approach. Food advertising existed, but had not yet achieved its later scale and sophistication. The budgets and psychological research that would later go into convincing Americans to eat more frequently, to treat food as emotional comfort, and to regard certain processed products as necessary parts of daily life were not yet fully deployed. Physical activity was built into daily life in ways it would not be later. More jobs required physical labor. More errands were completed on foot. Driving was supplemented by walking in ways that have since diminished. Exercise as a separate recreational category, something you drove to a building to do on a machine, was not yet the primary vehicle for physical activity. What changed and why it matters? The late 1970s brought high-fructose corn syrup to American soft drinks and the portion sizes that the cheaper sweetener made economically feasible. Soft drink containers grew. The growth was gradual enough that each step seemed modest, but the cumulative change over a decade was dramatic. Food scientists working for major manufacturers identified precise formulations that made products nearly impossible to eat in modest quantities. The research was conducted systematically and applied commercially. The products that resulted were engineered to encourage continued consumption in a way that the simpler foods of 1970 were not. Portion sizes began inflating as a competitive strategy. Restaurants and food manufacturers discovered that offering more for a small price increase attracted customers in ways that other strategies did not. Bigger appeared to be better, and the race to offer bigger portions pulled the entire industry towards serving sizes that bore no relationship to what a person actually needed to eat. Marketing repositioned snacking. Eating between meals, which had been actively discouraged for decades, was reframed as a healthy and necessary practice. The cultural message shifted from 3 meals a day is sufficient to your body needs fuel throughout the day. The food industry that would profit from that shift was the primary source of the message promoting it. The result was not a failure of individual willpower. It was the predictable outcome of a changed environment. Margaret still remembers what a meal felt like in 1974. A plate of food that was a plate of food, coffee that was coffee, a soda on a special occasion that tasted like a treat because it was one. She was not thin because she tried to be. She was thin because nothing around her was pushing in the other direction. The women who lived through this transformation understand something that the data confirms. The food itself changed, the portions changed, the occasions for eating changed, the substances inside the food changed, and the bodies of Americans changed with it at a population level in ways that individual choices could not prevent and cannot fully reverse. Tell us in the comments what you remember eating in the 1970s. Tell us what a regular dinner looked like at your table. Tell us what Saturday night pizza night meant in your house. Because the people who were there understand this better than any study can capture. Subscribe to American Throwback for more. The lesson the data points to is not about personal discipline. It is about what surrounds us and what that surrounding does to us over time without our noticing, one small change at a time. Americans were thinner in the 1970s because the food they were surrounded by made thinness the path of least resistance. What followed made something else the path of least resistance instead.